Okay, pens out, paper out. Let's get started. Here we are. We're going to start in the prehistoric period. Now, when we say prehistoric, what we're talking about is the time before humans began to write things down. What we divide the prehistoric into are two massive chunks of time called the Paleolithic and the Neolithic. Now, I've highlighted them here to help us understand why they're called these terms. Paleo is the Greek for old. Lithic is the Greek for stone. So when scholars and archaeologists are looking at the artifacts from the period of old stone, it's like really old stuff. And it's usually only the things made of stone have survived. The period called the Neolithic, neo means Greek for new, and lithic is Greek for stone. It just means that it's newer old stuff. So the really old stuff of stone and the newer old stuff of stone. The Paleolithic and the Neolithic. We're going to look at several sites from the Paleolithic and from the Neolithic in this class. Here's a map to show you exactly where we'll be jumping around. We're going to start with sites in Willendorf and Lascaux and Altamira. And then in the Neolithic, we're going to be looking at the settlement called Catalchayuk and Stonehenge. Our oldest artwork dates back to somewhere around 30,000 to 28,000 BCE. On our timeline, that handy dandy timeline. If we were to mark 1 CE and then our closest date of 2020 would be 2000 CE, then on the timeline, if these measurements were in reference, 28,000 BCE is way back here. Okay, if that's not very helpful, then think about it in terms of a chunk. Let's say that this square represents 500 years of time. If we were to look at one square of time, 500 years ago would be roughly the 1500s. So the Renaissance, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Raphael, Donatello is a little bit older than that, but still around there. So all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, okay. This is also time of Shakespeare, okay. Queen Elizabeth, sure. Okay, that's 500 years. 4 chunks, 4 blocks would be 2,000 years. 2,000 years would lead us to 1 CE. This is around the time of the rise of the Roman Empire. This is when we would be meeting Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Okay, all right. What about this? This is what 5,000 years looks like. If we were to go back 5,000 years, this is the oldest evidence of humans writing. So we have the beginning of writing. That's the beginning of writing 5,000 years ago. That's still not close enough to our oldest artwork. This is the closest we can get to our oldest artwork in this class. This is what 30,000 years looks like. It's really far back. And so because we have to consider of how far back in time this is, we need to consider the evidence, the context, and make educated assumptions based on what has been left behind, rather than definitive answers. So we're going to be interpreting these artworks rather than knowing this is what was meant, this is who made it, this is what he or she said about it. We don't know. So based on our education, our understanding of the larger environment, the context, we're going to be analyzing these prehistoric works. Now, as I said, we'll be going into several sites, and we need to keep in mind things like goals, tools, context, and understand that artworks can be sacred or secular, political or religious figures can be portrayed, but a larger connection to the human condition is always important when understanding and interpreting or assuming interpretations for these artworks. When we go back 30,000 years, we are going back to a time called the Ice Age. Not the movie, The Ice Age, or its subsequent sequels. No, we're talking about a time in which the world was literally much colder and covered with a lot more ice. Now, this map here is showing an estimation of migration patterns of human beings. We think that the human race, as we know it today, the Homo sapiens, established themselves here in the east coast of Africa, and then we have evidence showing a migration up and around the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe. These patterns of migration have a lot to do with the changing of the Ice Age into a more warm climate, and we're going to be looking at the artworks as reflections of these migrations. In the prehistoric world, or more specifically, the Paleolithic world, evidence has shown, and I say evidence, I mean campsites or bones or rocks, different materials that we believe come from this time. What we see is that humans lived in very small communities. Rather than living in large towns or cities, they were more like villages, 100 to maybe 500 people at its most, and they were sedentary. Sedentary meaning they didn't stay in one place. They moved, most likely they moved to follow the seasons, to follow the food. And that food would mainly consist of nuts, berries, vegetation. They would often have fish or any kind of smaller animals, but they weren't going to be hunting larger prey. That would be too dangerous for these humans to do with the kind of technology that they had. Now, the oldest artwork we're going to be looking at may be an expression of this smaller unit of village life, or the fragility of human life in this Paleolithic period. Here it is. We're going to be looking at this artwork in our next video. This is the Woman of Willendorf, who's often referred to as the Venus of Willendorf. See you in our next video.